Every fantasy writer, one of the basic questions you have to settle when you start out writing your books is how are you going to handle magic, sorcery, the fantasy elements. You see a lot of people writing in secondary world universes that are very high magic. It's something anybody can learn and anybody can do. I can make it, you can make it, you have the recipe, it all comes out right. To my mind, that took the magic out of magic. In magic, it's not just the recipe or the words of the spell, it's who you are, who's doing it, and what are you feeling when you're doing it. The Valyrians, while practicing their blood magic and their fire magic, noticed that it didn't matter whether you pronounced the words of the spell right, whether you made the correct sacrifice to the correct god. All of that may have had some importance. But one of the big things was who you are and what was your relation, particularly to the dragons. What are the dragons like? They're flying beasts. They have to have very large wings and a relatively slender serpentine body. A long tail, a long neck, 2 legs, 2 wings in front. They're made to fly and to strike at their prey from the air. But then there's the fire issue. So many people associate dragons with breathing fire. Leaving that out would just feel wrong. They are creatures of fire. They breathe fire. Fire doesn't harm them as easily as it would us. And there's something very magical about the fire.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This is going to be my House of the Dragon video on the magic of dragons. They have their own unique type of magic that's different from the magic that Melisandre, the power of the Red God that she draws on. It's different from warging, like the people of the North, the Children of the Forest, even the Stark children do. Including Jon Snow. Jon Snow is also a warg. It's also different than the magic of the Children of the Forest that Bran is now using as the Three-Eyed Raven. So we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, House of the Dragon Episode 1 is starting now. I'll be doing videos for all the episodes, just like my videos for the Game of Thrones main series, so be sure to subscribe to get them all. I'm also doing a giveaway for HBO Max subscriptions. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and post your favorite moment from all the trailers on the video. So as George R. R. Martin says, when he wrote A Song of Ice and Fire, he wanted magic in the world to be very different, very complex, much more complex than your traditional type of fantasy magic. Like, it's not as simple as just reading a spell and activating its effects. It's not something that everybody can pick up and do. So there are at least 9 unique types of magic in Game of Thrones, with a couple subsets each, in different terms for what you call people who practice each type of magic. But some people like Melisandre, other followers of the Red God, practice multiple types of magic. Children of the Forest also use multiple types of magic. There's elemental control, raising the dead, glamoring. Those are all types of magic that Melisandre uses. In the world, raising the dead is also thought of as a different skill from just flat-out necromancy. Really good example of that is what the Night King does is closer to necromancy than just raising the dead. Raising the dead is like bringing someone completely back to life. The Night King mostly just raises wights by just turning the dead into finger puppets. Melisandre also uses her enchanted gemstone to glamour herself, making herself appear as if she were still a middle-aged woman, when in fact she's closer to like 200 years old. Really cool side detail, because the show picks up about 187 years before the events of Game of Thrones Season 1, that means that Melisandre is a young girl during the events of House of the Dragon Season 1, but she's from the Shadowlands in Asshai, so she's not in Westeros while House of the Dragon is happening. I don't know if they're going to have a cameo scene with a young version of Melisandre or anything like that. There's divination, which are things like green sight and dragon dreams, which are 2 different things, but essentially the same basic idea, seeing versions of possible futures. Green sight is something that the Children of the Forest all possess naturally, and some wargs possess. Like Bran is born a green seer. In the case of dragon dreams, it's kind of the same situation, but with people of Valyrian descent. It's incredibly rare for someone to be born with the ability. Blood magic is meant to be one of the darkest and rarest types of magic in the world. Blood magic is like a broader type of magic that has a bunch of subsets. Like, you use it for a bunch of different types of things. Really good example is that during Game of Thrones Season 1, Mirri Maz Duur claims to be a blood mage, have the ability to save Khal Drogo's life, but she secretly has to sacrifice Daenerys' unborn baby Rhaego to do it. So using blood magic usually involves literally some sort of blood sacrifice. And because this series is meant to delve into the history of the Valyrians and the Targaryens, ancient Valyrians also practiced forms of blood magic when they tamed dragons initially and started the art of dragon bonding, turning it into more of a genetic thing that eventually future generations could just pass on to the next one. Supposedly, blood magic was also used in the creation of Valyrian steel, which I think is one of the reasons why creating new Valyrian steel has become a lost art when we pick up on House of the Dragon, because it requires a lot of magical spells that people just don't know. It's way more complicated than just finding the right ingredients. On the show, there are a lot more references and Easter eggs for the ancient Valyrian freehold before the Doom, so we do hope we get more lore about the ancient Valyrians in future seasons. Alchemy is also considered a completely different type of magic. That's one that's practiced by the Alchemist Guild, which gets into the creation of wildfire that we saw during the original series. There's also skin changing, which you think of as warging. Skin changing is like another ability that descends from the Children of the Forest. It started with them, and then they slowly passed it into some of the first men that lived near them, and eventually those first men fought the Kings of Winter, they started intermarrying, and that's how eventually you're born with Stark children who all have wolf dreams and are capable of warging. When we talk about wolf dreams, it's a little bit different from dragon dreams. In the books, the Stark children who still have dire wolves that are still alive have wolf dreams, and what's happening is that when they're asleep, they're basically warging into their dire wolves without realizing it. There was a trailer during one of the early seasons where they kind of teased that. So like Jon Snow and Arya, for example, still have dire wolves that are still alive, they still have wolf dreams. It's just that both Jon Snow and Arya never practiced the ability, so they don't know how to actually warg. Like, you actually have to practice the skill. That's why Bran is the only one that can actually do it. Dragon dreams, like I said, are just like literally seeing possible futures. The magic of dragons, as George R. R. Martin talks about it being like a completely different thing, is sort of like a subset of blood magic, I think, because of the way they bond with certain types of Valyrian blood. Really good example of this is that like everybody at the ancient Valyrian freehold, all the houses were not dragon lords, meaning that not everybody who lived in ancient Valyria were bonded to dragons. That's where we get to the Valyrians, this family here. It's spelled differently, so Valyrians come from ancient Valyria, spelled differently, but they were not ancient dragon lords, which is why they can't ride dragons, but the Targaryens can, because the Targaryens in ancient history were dragon lords. So I think we'll find out through the lore that ancient Valyrians who were dragon lords practiced this special type of blood magic, commingling their blood using a lot of really dark arts and spells to basically domesticate dragons and then pass that ability on genetically to future generations in their houses. The sidestep to this problem, like the reason why you see a lot of Valyrians have white hair but not be bonded to dragons, is because during the last couple hundred years you have a lot of Targaryens intermarrying with Valyrians and their children then get the gene that way. So there are some Valyrians who do have the ability to bond with dragons. Best example of that on the House of the Dragon TV show are Rhaenys Targaryen's children with Corlys Velaryon. So Rhaenys Targaryen, this woman here, has a dragon called Meleys. She was born a Targaryen, she has a dragon just like all the other Targaryens. She married Corlys Velaryon, who is not a dragon rider, didn't have the gene, but their children did have the gene. But as George R. R. Martin says, he wanted the way magic worked in A Song of Ice and Fire to be very particular. That's why, for instance, the Night King, who was a member of the First Men 1,000 years ago, wasn't born with the dragon bonding gene originally. Thus, he could only ride Viserion after he had died and then raised him up as a wight using necromancy. Like a magical flex tape workaround without breaking the rules of the universe. When Martin says that the fire dragons create is a special kind of fire, like the fire itself has magical properties, I think partly that's just the innate magical power that all dragons are born with in the way that children of the forest are born with a really strong affinity for magic. But the big theory is that a lot of these types of blood magic, necromancy, the powers of the Night King, the White Walkers, all the children of the forest, all come from the same source. Like in a larger sense, they're all drawing on the same magical power, just using it in very, very different ways. Or like the dragons and the children of the forest, they're connected to it in different ways. Because literally, the Night King and the White Walkers are creation of the Children of the Forest, so their magic power is based on the same powers as the Children of the Forest. Under normal circumstances, I would say Dragon Fire is just probably better for killing White Walkers because it burns so much hotter than normal fire, but there's also probably some biochemical reasons for why fire itself is more potent, along with why Dragon Glass and Valyrian Steel are so much more potent in killing White Walkers. But here's where we get to the magical side of that too, like the magical properties behind the dragons in the Targaryens. So on a biological level, the dragons' bodies will just create certain types of chemicals that mix to create the fire when they're exposed to air. The reason why the fire burns so much hotter is probably because of the types of chemicals their bodies produce, but it's also probably what makes their bodies so much more resistant to regular types of fire. And it's also why I think the Targaryens, those of Valyrian descent, aren't burnt by fire nearly as easily, because ancient Valyrians use this blood magic spells to literally bond parts of dragons' genetic code with their blood. So that metaphorically and literally they became kind of like dragons. But remember, there's a lot of magical spells involved with how they actually got started in ancient Valyria bonding dragons, so it wasn't like some ancient Valyrian went up to dragons one day and gave himself a dragon IV of a bunch of their blood, and suddenly they thought of him as one of their own. The ancient freehold taming dragons is based a lot on the real-world domestication of horses, so just like that, it took a long time, a lot of selective breeding, because this is a Song of Ice and Fire, blood magic spells along the way. So it wasn't like an overnight thing. In order to get to the point on the show here where Targaryens could hatch a new dragon egg and that new dragon wouldn't just eat them right on the spot. Like I talked about in the past, the show is going to get into a lot of the personalities between the different dragons. Like all the dragons will have their own different types of personalities, but if we're talking about animals, they're mostly like cats, very standoffish, but when they bond with someone, they become incredibly loyal. But that's why just like anybody off the street can't just walk up and ride them. Like if you try to go up and pick up a random cat, it would just run off. George R. R. Martin talks a lot about the biology of dragons, just dragons growing over time. And even though it's not magic, just on a biological level, dragons never stop growing. The longer they live, the more they consume over time, the bigger they'll get. This is like a really easy size chart to just help show you. So like the biggest dragons are typically the oldest ones. When the show begins, Balerion the Black Dread has died recently. He was about 200 years old when he died, making Vhagar the biggest one on the show, but also the oldest. And they say that as dragons get older, they become more like B-52 bombers. Much harder to take off in, much harder to land in, but even more deadly in the air. Flying around on Vhagar is kind of like flying around on a giant fortress. There'll be 17 total dragons that are alive during this period we'll meet over the course of the series, but I believe during Season 1 we're only going to meet 9 of them. We've seen a bunch during the trailers, but not every single one. I'll talk about them a little bit more as they pop up in episodes. If you have any other questions about the dragons, how they work, or the magic behind them, how their abilities work, just write them below in the comments and I'll be sure to add them to my bonus videos. My full House of the Dragon Episode 1 video will post later tonight. Be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss it. Everyone click here for my House of the Dragon review video, and click here for my new House of the Dragon trailer breakdown. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.